Welcome, class, to week 4 of Bubbles, Panics, and Depressions, a world history of economic crisis. Keep up with your discussion posts. In a couple weeks, we're going to have an exam. And then the discussion post work that you're doing will really be useful to you because it will lay the groundwork for your exam work. Okay, make sure and email me if you have any questions. Now, today we're going to talk about some early economic bubbles and ensuing panics or collapses that took place in Europe. And so these are early modern economic crises. This is a time period in which economic systems were rudimentary. There were no safeguards in place. Unscrupulous individuals and corporations could actually take advantage of people. So it's important to kind of note that we have more safeguards today in our financial system. But we still can have economic collapses or economic crises. So that I think that'll never change. That'll never go away. We just try to put as many safeguards in place as we can in order to prevent that. Okay, so let's talk about Tulipmania first. Now, Tulipmania comes from the desire to have tulips. What's a tulip? Okay, hang on, I'll show you a picture. Here is a picture. I can get it up for you to see. There it is. That's a picture of tulips. It's also a picture of my son Eli and my my sister-in-law. And so tulips are actually very popular in some parts of the mainland. Parts of the mainland where it gets cold in the wintertime, the tulip bulb actually survives that, and it comes up in the in the springtime. So you don't actually have to replant it every year. It's kind of a permanent bulb. It's very hardy. And so these were tulips that were grown in my mom and dad's garden, and they tended to come up around Easter time and very popular in that part of the country for those reasons. So when we think about the causes of tulip mania in Holland, then we have to consider first the issue of the popularity of tulips themselves. So that's important to remember. Now, the other thing, there's several other things that are happening around the time of the tulip bubble that are influencing the price of tulips. Okay, one of them is the Great Plague. It's a bubonic plague spread by fleas that jump from rats to humans, and this is a plague which killed about a third to one half of all the people of Europe between 1440 and about 1600. So this had created major crisis in the European economy. It also had created major opportunities for certain individuals because there was, in some cases, more money now than there was previously, and fewer people to share that money with. So the bubonic plague or the black plague, I think, plays a role here. It's not completely clear as to exactly what role it is, but there certainly was instability in the European economy. Okay, now the 30 Years' War was also taking place. The tulip bubble takes place between about 1635 and 1637 in Holland. And during that time period, the 30 Years' War is taking place. And the 30 Years' War is actually, it's a war, of course, that lasts for 30 years, but it's this vicious war between Catholics and Protestants, between Northern Europe, which is more Protestant, and Southern Europe, which is more Catholic. And there are entire areas of Europe that are burned over, towns that are burned to the ground, citizens killed or raped or both. It's a very nasty affair, actually, and it's really disillusioning for Europe. So it makes finance very unstable. It's very difficult to find long-term investments, and so investing in something that promises a quick return, like the tulips do in this time period, is very attractive. So Europeans are more likely, I think, to invest in tulips, in the tulip bulb, because of the 30 Years' War. Now, the Dutch had also created a very efficient, effective state chartered company called the Dutch East Indies Company. And the Dutch East Indies Company, of course, was the trade company that sent ships from Holland to Southeast Asia and picked up goods there and brought them back to Holland and created fantastic profits. Profits in the range of 16% annum for about the first 100 years of the company. So it was unbelievable profits. You take that any day on the stock market. So the Dutch East Indies Company creates capital in Amsterdam, in Holland. And that capital is it needs to be invested, right? It needs to circulate and create returns. And so the Dutch are very interested in investing this new money, this new capital, in things that will create a return. And it turns out between 1635 and 37, the tulip bulb is a very good investment. It's creating very big returns. Okay, so that's basically the reason for this. Now, the French also get involved in the investing in tulips in 1636. 1636 is a lull in the 30 Years' War. And so the French have some extra money and they want to plant tulips that will come up in their fancy gardens. So this is mostly aristocracy and merchants who are making these investments. Of course, poor people can't afford this. And so the tulip becomes very attractive. In fact, between 1635 and 1636, the tulip is ratcheted up in price so that one tulip is worth, and let me read this to you. This is in your notes as well. One tulip is worth 2 lasts of wheat, 4 lasts of rye, is like a bushel, 4 fat oxen, 8 fat swine, 12 fat sheep, 2 hogshead of wine, that's a lot of wine, 4 tuns of beer, 2 tons of butter, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a complete bed, a suit of clothes, and a silver drinking cup. That's one tulip. Okay, so this is this was reported. We don't actually know that somebody actually paid that amount for one tulip bulb, but we do know that tulip bulbs went up pretty dramatically in price. Now, the tricky thing about tulip bulbs is that the tulip is the flower that comes up. The bulb is the thing that stays in the ground through the winter and can create a new, tulip plant in the spring. So it's very attractive because, as I said, it's this perennial plant that comes up every spring. Once you get a bulb, it should come up in the spring and produce a flower for a long time. And the other thing is that within Dutch culture, tulips were considered very attractive and valuable. So there's another part of it. Now, so tulips started going up in value, and one of the things that happens is the tulip traders are actually trading tulips not just in the summertime, not just selling the flower, they're actually selling the bulbs, and they sell those year round, especially in the wintertime when the bulbs are still in the ground. They will sell the bulbs ahead of the spring emergence of the flower. And so one of the reasons prices go up is because they're selling these as commodities really in advance. And people don't really know if a particular bulb is going to produce. So there's some question mark about what the value is. And this allows traders to push up the price pretty dramatically, especially when this capital starts coming in. Okay, so people are investing in tulip bulbs. The price of tulip goes up, and then the next winter in 1637, the Dutch Assembly passes a law that says that the contracts that the traders have signed with people who intend to buy or intend to sell tulip bulbs to them, these contracts, which were considered ironclad, now the legislature says these can be considered optional. So all of a sudden the traders can actually get out. And a lot of traders recognize at that point that the price of tulips is too high and they decide to get out of these contracts. And so all of a sudden, instead of the value of a tulip bulb being very high, then these traders can actually set the price a lot lower by getting out by simply refusing to pay that amount of money for these contracts. So the price of tulips collapse. A lot of people lose a substantial amount of money in the collapse, and that's Tulipmania. That's the tulip bubble. It's a very simple bubble, a price bubble, which eventually collapses, and then people lose some money. Now, uh, some people have argued that this is more important. I think this is not so important. I think it's not as important as some people like John Kenneth Galbraith have argued. He kind of wants to use it as a morality lesson to talk about the 1987 crash of the stock market. I don't think it's that big of a deal. The next bubble that we're going to talk about is a bigger deal. This is John Law's Mississippi Company bubble. Okay, let's talk about John Law. As Niall Ferguson says in his video, John Law was basically a crook. He was a scoundrel, maybe a spy. He was somebody you shouldn't trust, and yet he was very clever and charismatic, and he got the King of France to trust him. So the king eventually trusts him so much that Law is able to establish a new bank, the Banque Generale, and the bank takes on all of the debt of France. This seems to be a good deal for the king because he doesn't want to deal with all that debt, and if the bank can take care of the debt and eventually get rid of the debt, that's fantastic. The bank also can print money, can print bank bills and coins, and the bank also can sell shares in John Law's Mississippi Company, which is essentially a settlement company. It's a company to settle settlers in colonial Louisiana. Okay, so he's got all three of these housed in one place. And essentially, what John Law does is he sells shares in one, and then he uses that money to start the next scheme, and then he sells shares in the next one. And again, he doesn't actually use profits to give dividends. He actually uses the money he gets from the next scheme to actually give dividends. This is a very dangerous practice called Ferguson calls it a Ponzi scheme. It's not quite a Ponzi scheme, but it's a bit like a Ponzi scheme. Okay, so John Law is doing this. It's really fundamentally dependent on whether or not he can make money with his Mississippi company. If he can establish a colony there in Louisiana, and this colony becomes productive, and he can trade with the colony, then maybe he could have made his way out of this. But he cannot. He gets some settlers to buy into the company. They sail to Louisiana. They find lots of swamps and mosquitoes and alligators, and they turn around and come back. And that's the end of John Law's Mississippi scheme. And what happens then is the shares in the Mississippi Company, once this gets out, begin to drop. And once those shares drop, then the shares in the bank drop, the shares in French debt drop in value. Everything drops in value because it's all connected together. And so you have what is a general economic collapse in France among those with money. Again, this doesn't affect poor people because poor people don't have money, so they didn't invest. Wealthy aristocrats and financiers and merchants are the ones who are hurt here, and the king, quite frankly. John Law flees the country. He ends up in Venice, but his name is discredited. The French actually have to, I think they default on some of their debt at this point, and the debt just dogs them. They don't default on all of it, and the debt really dogs them for the rest of the century. They're skittish about doing capital development, moving to paper money completely, and their capital markets are very they're shallow markets. They don't have a lot of capital in them. And so the French monarchy develops more and more debt over the century, and they help to fight the American Revolution. That produces more debt, and by 1789 they've got so much debt they don't know what to do with it. And this eventually leads to revolution. Okay, that's John Law. That's the John Law Mississippi Company bubble. One more bubble to illustrate this. Now, the thing about John Law's bubble, it was connected to public debt. This is actually very important because having private companies who were attempting to handle the public debt was an attractive solution for monarchs. But the truth is, it wasn't necessarily a good idea. It didn't work in the Mississippi Company. There was another company called the South Seas Company in Great Britain, formed at about the same time as John Law's company, with a very similar approach. It was a company that took on British public debt. It also established a trading company to the South Seas, which was essentially South America, and it created shares in the South Seas Company, and these shares became very attractive. People bought them up, and then turns out that the company could never trade with South America because South America was controlled by Spain. The shares collapse. The company collapses. Some people are put on trial actually for financial malfeasance. One of the outcomes of this is that there's another company there trying to get a hold of British public debt and use that debt to make money. It's called the Bank of England. That company actually stays afloat, and that company takes the debt, this debt that the South Seas Company couldn't handle, takes public debt, and eventually becomes the National Bank of England. It's still considered to be private even today, but it sets interest rates in England. It sets exchange rates. It's a very powerful institution that still, like I say, it's nominally private, but it's actually like the central bank of England. Okay, so we have three bubbles, two of which are quite significant, in which public debt is involved. And, there's all kinds of mischief that can go on with that. Okay, so we'll talk next week about the Industrial Revolution. Okay.